The signal is strong. We are
All
good to
right.
go. So this is with this is KJ Bervin's story, and it's called Ram Jam. Um, I have read this. I don't think the name is anything um, risque or anything like that. But uh, if it does get well, I'll be reading along with you. Anyway, okay. So I'm going to turn it over to you, voice close. Is that okay? All right.
Yes. All
Here we
right.
go with Ram Jam.
All right. Ram Jam by KJ Bervin. Cresting the wild grassed hill was proving difficult in the April drizzle. Vera tightened her grip on her walking stick and puffed loudly as the summit grew closer. Her long sleeves felt more stifling after the exertion and humidity from the last hour's trek. A squelch and immediate thud from behind signaled that her companion had lost his footing again. She looked behind to see her Gil wiping the soil from his hands and knees. A little more, Gil. We'll take a breather at the top. Fine, he exhaled. Vera turned and continued the ascent towards her destination. It had been several years since she had been able to return to the pasture. The verdant land with its fauna had been a treasured retreat from her childhood. The property owner and family friend had passed not long after the new year had begun, and time to take at least the last glimpse at a setting she had deemed something out of a Georgian-era novel was growing short. The land was deemed a burden by its heir, and proceedings to put it on the market were underway. A buzzing overhead prompted Vera and Gil to whip their gazes towards a large drone hovering high in the grey sky above them. Looks like Gritman's arrived, huffed Gil, stepping past Vera. I don't blame him for wanting to skip this damn hike. Vera rolled her eyes at Gil's sourness. It puzzled her how someone with as much access to the open spaces and vistas of the countryside as him turned out to be such a callow crab of a human being. The love of the outdoors is obviously not genetic and had not developed with exposure. Jill had always been more reserved and fastidious than the average boy in their shared youth. Summers with Gil were often a mixture of well-preserved fantasy books, overly sanctioned lake swimming, and nature walks set to the looped soundtrack of his various aches and complaints. It was no surprise that Gil's uncle, the late Andrew Peck, had made Gil his heir, but Vera his exetrix. A last task had to be carried out to make sure the property was ready for sale. The endeavour was Vera's to accomplish, and Gil's to tolerate in order to confirm the land was, in Andrew's word, fit for city folk to set about. Gil, you'll see this is worth the effort. Trust me, she chided. I know what you mean, though. I think the closest thing Gritman has seen to a mountain is that Mont Blanc watch of his. Vera giggled at her crack at the realtor's expense as she thrust her stick into the grass. She looked ahead at Gil, trudging with shallow, pained steps. The hood of his sweatshirt was pulled low to his brows, while his cargo shorts revealed the evidence of his unsure, sneakered feet on the rain-slicked grass. Vera mentally paused as she judged her misplaced friend. This excursion was indeed wearing on her feet and joints as well, but this outing was proof positive who let the comfort to the city affect them more. She looked ahead and grinned at a telltale dark flagstone that jutted out from amongst the emerald and gold turf. Vera clenched a walking stick in her left hand and commanded her legs to power through the last few yards of the hill, passing the winded Gil. Her eyes met a stretch of familiar timothy and orchard grass. The stalks of defiant fountain grasses that swayed in the ever-present gust haphazardly studied the sides of the worn dirt path that marked the long way the wooden carts had once travelled to deposit its collection of hay bales and alfalfa. Dead ahead was the mammoth yellow Norway maple that dominated the landscape. The bold chartreuse foliage seemed to almost pulsate as it stood out between the dour sky and the endless greenery. The sight that most charmed Vera's vision, however, was the presence of the annual visiting flock of collared Cheviot sheep that freely roamed about the field. The ewes looked over at Vera with unbothered gazes, as the few timid lambs hid behind the woolly bodies of their mothers. This will likely be the last time a flock will be brought up here, she thought sadly. Vera dropped her walking stick and sighed with relief as she slid the straps of her rucksack off her shoulders. Freeing her water bottle from the bag's side pocket, she heard Gil's footfalls behind her come to a sputter. Gil stretched his arms forward and let them fall to his sides in exasperation. All this way for a bunch of goddamn sheep, he panted. Vera side-eyed him as she took a long swig from her water bottle. Remind me why we couldn't take your Jeep for this instead of trudging uphill and all this shit. Because, Vera started, handing him the water, would have meant that Gripman would have insisted on coming along. I don't want to hear about land development or potential buyers right now. I want to enjoy the moment. We'll do what we need to, though. Don't worry. Vera sat on the ground and loosened the drawstring on her rucksack to retrieve her phone. Gil chugged eagerly and pulled away with a gasp. Revived somewhat, he looked about before taking a few steps towards one of the closer lambs. A sudden harsh beeping from the lamb's collar was quickly repeated behind the maple tree. The unexpected noise drew both Vera and Gil's attention. The sheep started to quickly trot away, clearing a suspiciously clear path between the two visitors and whatever was coming to life behind the trunk. Out clambered a 3-foot-tall metal quadrupedal construct. The steel wool-wrapped head of the unit raised up from a hydraulic piston and aimed a stern red-eye camera towards the perceived intruders. The construct buzzed as a yellow scanning laser popped out of his port side housing and powered on. The beam started to pan from the far left of the field towards Vera and a panicking Gil. What the hell is that thing? He whined. Vera froze before finally setting her hands on her phone within her rucksack. She quickly tapped it on and held up an expanded QR code at the beam's level. The yellow beam paused at the phone's display as it transitioned to a green shade. The scanning laser folded back into the mysterious robot's housing, and after a moment, started to step leftwards away from the pair. A prop window on Vera's phone popped up as the flock's guardian wandered off. Security ID confirmed. Downey, Vera, Unit 001, Ram Jam, patrol mode activated. Gil turned to glare at Vera and marched towards her. He spiked a water bottle to the ground. I said, what the hell was that? He yelled. That, Vera started, is the main reason we had to come up here. She craned over to fish a water bottle out of the turf. Uncle Andrew gave me access to the bot when he bought it. He knew he couldn't make it up here by himself anymore, so he modernized. Why the hell didn't you tell me? I own this place, so I should know if there's some killer robo-ram running around before I sell this shithole, Gil shrieked. Vera stared at Gil with frustration. He was still panting and flushed, visibly shaken, or insulted. She didn't really care at this point, because she'd heard enough. Vera rose to her feet. She moved her phone to her left hand as he started again. And Uncle Andrew, Vera? He wasn't your fam... The back of Vera's right hand cracked into Gil's right cheek, stopping his ranting. Gil stepped back and gazed, wide-eyed at a seething Vera. You miserable little bastard. Does this place really mean nothing to you? After all the time we spent here as kids? Vera cried. You really think I like trudging through sheep shit and mosquitoes, Vera? Give me a break. The only reason I came along was to make sure you didn't screw this up, Gil snapped, rubbing his cheek. I am so sick of your bullshit, Gil. You want to sell this place and spoil all of it? Go ahead. Sign the release form and go be the whiny little pussy Uncle Andrew knew you were, Vera spat. She marched past Gil towards the maple tree. She fumed as she heard Gil start at her. She paused when she felt his hand groping for her phone. Give me this thing, he gritted, trying to snatch it from her. She lobbed the phone towards the maple tree and shoved Gil away. Gil stumbled back from the blow and darted towards where the phone landed. Vera dove and reached for Gil's lower body. She tensed and roughly yanked his left leg out from under him. Gil lost his balance and fell downwards onto his stomach. Panting, Vera climbed up on his back and pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his head. Gil started to flail and attempted to roll Vera off of him. She swept up and sat on his shoulders. Get the fuck off me! Now! Gil screamed, still trying to push himself off the ground. Vera dug her nails in the crown of his head through the hood. I'm not letting you up until you calm down. Trying to snatch my phone away like that, you coward! A sharp, loud buzzing grew behind Vera, along with a constant rush of air. Vera turned her head backwards to see Gritman's drone floating several feet behind them. A crack on the air signaled a speaker was activated. Guys, the hell's going on? Vera, why do you have Gil pinned on the ground? Asked Gritman. Vera turned back to stare at Gil's writhing body and groaned. She released his head, pushed herself off Gil's body to a squat position. As she rose to stand, Gil painfully ambled back to his feet and wrenched his sweatshirt over his head. Eric, call the police! Vera assaulted me! He panted, grasping his stomach. Gil limped towards the drone, eyes searching for the onboard camera. Did you hear me? This drone's footage is my proof! Vera's mind raced before she quickly jogged towards her discarded phone. She picked it up and opened another window while Gil continued with Gritman's drone. Wait, you're breaking up a bit. I think there's something messing with the radio signal. Can you repeat that? Asked Gritman. Gil huffed as he dropped his head in annoyance and started back at the whirring drone. Jesus, I said that Vera just assault... Gil yelled before a red laser fixed itself on the hull of the drone. Gil craned his head around to see the same quadruped robot from before lined up perfectly with him and Gritman's drone. The red camera eye was glued to the pair's every move. The laser this time was red, and primed for firing. Gil's eyes found Vera leaning against the maple tree, watching him intently. Her hand hovered above the phone, ready to command the robot to take out her now former friend. "Apologize," she said calmly. Gil turned his body to face Vera's. He gulped quickly before summoning his voice. "Come on, Vera. Let's be reasonable here. We had a disagreement, okay? Whatever. It happened. We can move on from this. But Andrew wouldn't want us to fight. Think of what Uncle Andrew would want us to do," Gil pleaded, his arms outreached in front of him. "You're right. We should," Vera whispered to herself. She tapped a button on her phone. "Unit 001, Ramjam. Manual defense mode. Target locked. Firing." The beam struck the drone, puncturing its hull and igniting the lithium batteries within. The drone quickly fell from the air, bursting into flames. Gil jumped away from the explosion and fell to the ground. He stared at the burning wreckage charring the orchard grass. Whirring hydraulics coming towards him brought him back to his attention, as the robot was now to the right of him, standing a foot from his rumbled frame. Gil sat frozen in place, held fast as Vera slowly walked from the maple tree to face him. She looked Gil over. He was wet, dirty, bruised, breathing heavy with fear and exhaustion. It was as if decades' worth of bad karma had finally come around to haunt him. She suppressed a schadenfreude-fueled snicker before she spoke again. "You still gonna press charges?" she asked. Gil didn't answer, eyes darting between Vera and the robot. "Answer me," she gritted, hovering her index finger over the face of her phone. "No, I'll tell Kirkman it was a mistake. I'll say it was all a friendly tussle, like old times," he stammered. She could hear the defeat in his voice. She savored it. For a moment. His humility was quite rare. "Uncle Andrew would want you to sell this land for commercial development. You know that. You should sell it to another farmer, or someone who won't wreck this place. Do you understand?" she asked with a clear implication. "I do, yeah. Now, can I stand up, please?" Gil whined. Vera's head cocked to the side as she peeped back at her phone. She tapped a few more buttons. "Unit 001, Ramjam. Manual defense mode. Activate. Headbutt." "I don't know, can you?" she asked, looking back up at Gil. His eyes widened with shock, but quickly fell out of her sight as the robot rammed into Gil's skull. He fell to the ground, out cold, as the robot walked over his prone form. Vera tapped her phone once again. "Unit 001, Ramjam. Shadow mode. Activated." Vera stepped over to Gil and reached down. She felt his breath in the back of her hand. Nodding at the confirmation, Vera looked back at the robot and smiled. "Come on, we'll take a walk before we head back down, Ramjam." The robot trotted behind Vera, almost gleefully, as they made their way back towards her discarded supplies. She stared ahead at the maple tree as the sheep started to gather back around it. Its sharp, eye-catching hue glowed brighter as the clouds started to break, revealing a late morning sun. "Glorious, huh?" she asked the robot. "Uncle Andrew always said that when the sun hits the leaves." "I bet he told you that too." Steady whirring was the only response, as the two continued through the orchard grass.